And you did that very surreal Star Wars holiday special.
I did. We had Steve Binder in here, too.
Steve Binder.
Yeah.
Well, he was called in.
I know he was the second guy. Yeah.
It was.
He's oddly proud of it, by the way.
Well, we look. First of all, it was the '70s. So we were on everything really, but skateboards. I mean, we could have been if we'd had any balance left from all the weed we smoked. But I mean, if we thought that 40 years later we'd be talking about it, we would have paid closer attention. I mean, it was in the world of television. It was not unusual to do something insane. Just to get the audience's attention, Wayne Newton at SeaWorld. I mean,
did you write Wayne Newton at SeaWorld?
I did.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
Cole Porter in Paris, starring Connie Stevens. It was just who you want to hear sing Cole Porter in Paris.
God,
a great woman. I'm a friend of hers and I'm a fan. But I mean, it was just. But that was the kind of show, Steve and Edie sing the Beatles. This was, And so it wasn't so unusual.
Sure.
Because you would do this thing and it would have a theme and then you would load it up with stars. You were cross-promoting things like it was a CBS show. So it was full of Harvey Korman and originally Cher. But she'd had a little surgery and she couldn't do it. And so Diane Carroll, who fit into the costume.
She's the fantasy.
Was the fantasy sequence. Which, by the way, was the first. She was the fantasy of one of the Wookiees.
Yes.
And he was wearing a VR helmet, which George kind of came up with, and now they exist.
Wow,
a virtual reality helmet, and it would plug in, and your fantasy would be realized. And she was his fantasy realized.
I can't remember if it was Itchy or Lumpy.
It was the grandpa.
Oh, it was grandpa.
Itchy. Lumpy was the kid.
That's right.
And Itchy had the fantasy. So it was the first interracial, interspecies romance on network television. Where is my NAACP Image Award?
Yes.
I ask you. We broke ground. It was a double header, not merely racial, but special.
What did you describe the Wookiee language as? The sound of...
Well, I said the Wookiees, they sound like fat people having orgasms.
Right.
Trust me, I know.
That's my favorite.
That was, hi, honey, I'm home.
And the Wookiees, they had a strange description of what they looked like.
I did really.
Well, there was one in particular, I think, that he's alluding to that George Lucas referred to. One of them.
Cuntface was.
Yeah, that's the one.
Cuntface was not a Wookiee. Cuntface was an alien.
Oh, okay.
Okay. You don't want to call him by the wrong name.
I made the same mistake.
George had done. I have to explain that they're on their way home to the Wookiee planet, Chewbacca, and he's in the Millennium Falcon with Han Solo and Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker, and they stop off on the planet Tatooine, where the cantina. That's the cantina, and all these aliens are there. And George had shot the Empire, but it was editing it, and so he had a whole bunch of new aliens. But he didn't want to use them on the show. And he didn't want to build new aliens. So we used remainder aliens. We went to the alien warehouse and pulled out the aliens that had not made the cut in the first two movies. And they were all like Elmer's glue all and Scotch tape. And those were the aliens we used. And one of them was like a huge vagina on your shoulders and a kind of nondescript a space captain outfit. And George has there's a vaginal leitmotif in those movies. In the Empire, there's a huge vagina that almost swallows Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, yes.
And Carrie's holding on like she's got handcuffs and she almost goes. It's a big hole in the desert that looks like
the third one.
Big old
Jedi.
Big old vajayjay. And the prototype, I think, was this puppet, this head that we called him Cuntface. And he made the cut. He was on our show because we just said, we can't. We have to. Even the censor let us use him.
And then it was like he had to be there while B. Arthur.
B was singing a song.
Yeah, she wanted the song, right?
B was Maud at the time, and she had come from Broadway, where she had won the Tony for Mame as Vera Charles, and she had been the original Yenta the Matchmaker in Fiddler, and she wanted to sing. And she brought in a song that she wanted to sing, and it was the dark alien bar, and she decided that she was the kind of Brechtian bartender, the woman who runs the thing, and she was very Statue of Liberty, standing there with her beer stein, and she wanted to sing the Alabama song by Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill. Oh, show me the way to the next whiskey bar. Oh, no, that's why. Oh, and it ends with, I tell you I will die. I tell you I will die. And she said, this is my Brecht Weill number. And I said, it's your Weill Brecht number is what it is.
Very good.
But we should, and we had to clear it with Bertolt Brecht's estate. And they said, what are you, nuts? You sing for Otis, so she should sing this thing on television with the alien, with the cunt face. So we had Ken and Mitzi Welch, who had written all of those Carol Burnett medleys.
Sure, they're legends.
And they wrote a piece of special material that was sort of homage to Brecht and Weill. And it was, I forget what the song was, but it was kind of like, it also was a lot like Those Were the Days, my friend.
Yeah, I didn't write it down, but
it was one of those kinds of songs. And so it was a bit more up than the Alabama song. And B sang it. And Cunface was part of the group behind her. And it was 123 degrees, and these guys in the heads were boiling, and they would keep passing out. And every time one passed out and had to be taken away, I would move Cunface closer to B.
Hilarious.
And so finally, it was like a two-shot with her and Cunface at the end of the thing, and she's singing it to him.
Whose idea was it to put Harvey Korman in drag as a Julia Child
I don't know.
type?
Well, I remember it may have been mine, or it may have been Rod Warren, who was one of the writers, or Lenny Rips, or Pat Proft. They were all writers on the show. And, in a Stone session, who knows?
Right.
But we knew we had to use Harvey because Harvey was on the Burnett Show, which was a big CBS show, and part of it was
Working the CBS people in.
Yeah, right. And so we were trying to think of something funny Harvey would do. And Harvey, of course, loved to do drag.
He loved to do the big
and the big
bosomy,
as the stomach churns.
Yes.
And so we thought it'd be funny to have him as Julia. There were a lot of people doing Julia Child. Dan Aykroyd did the very funny one with all the blood, which of course we couldn't do. But we had to do a different one. So we said, let's make Julia Child an alien and have her cooking with 8 arms so she can do a million different things.
You've brought it up to Lucas over the years when you've run into him?
Oh, he walks away.
Walks away.
Whenever I see him, he just head goes down. He doesn't want to be
Don't want
reminded.
to talk about it.
Yeah, for a long time, nobody knew about it, and then the internet happened.
Yeah.
And what happened was a generation of kids who had watched the first 3, which are, of course, now the second 3. They watched the first 3 Star Wars movies on video and knew everything about it and took it as a religion. Discovered through the internet that there was this other thing that they had never known about, that George had actually been involved in, that they then, of course, had to
get it
study, and they were betrayed. They felt, how could he have done this? How could he have lowered himself to this vaudeville with this thing, which is kind of like, the Mishnah.
Yeah, they take it very seriously.
It's the Talmud, these 3 movies. So they began writing him serious hate mail, and so he was appalled because he really thought it was dead and buried.
Nice thing to be a part of, though. A nice part of pop culture history to have been a part of.
Oh, yeah.
From your standpoint.
And then B. Arthur, at the end of her song, she hits her big note and swings her arm.
Yeah, she swung her. She swung her arm and she knocked Cunface, and he went over. And she turned to the camera and she said, "I've never hit a man in the cunt before."
What would you kill to be on that set, Gilbert?
Oh, my God.
The whole thing got cut, and we had to reshoot the number. And